A nurse has no authority to treat without a doctor's order. The hospital director's voice thundered through the corridor. Rachel stood firm, hands steady on the bandage, pressing it against the frail arm of the old man in the battered military jacket. Whispers rippled through the nurse's station as a cold silence fell. Outside, 6 black SUVs rolled to a stop at the hospital entrance. Men in full Marine dress uniforms stepped out, their faces unreadable, their steps precise. Who was this old man Rachel had saved? And what secret could make an entire Marine unit march through a hospital to stand before a nurse they had never met? Rachel Carter had always been the kind of nurse you wanted on your worst day. At 35, she was known throughout St. Nan's Hospital for her calm under pressure, her meticulous attention to detail, and the small human touches that made patients feel seen. Rachel remembered birthdays, favorite meals, and even the names of grandchildren. She carried a little notebook in her pocket where she jotted down reminders, not because she had to, but because it mattered to her. Yet, when her shift ended and she walked out into the night, the quiet hit hard. Rachel lived alone in a modest 1-bedroom apartment 5 blocks from the hospital. Her routine was simple microwave dinners, a cat named Oliver who waited by the door, and a worn couch where she sometimes fell asleep still wearing her scrubs. There was no partner, no children. Her life revolved around the hospital, the patients, the calling she believed was stitched into her very being. But even a calling can wear thin. Nursing in America was a world of impossible choices. The staff was always stretched too thin, the hours too long, the demands too relentless. Rachel had worked 12-hour shifts that turned into 16, watching as one nurse called in, sick, another resigned, and the emergency room filled to bursting. She had held the hand of a sobbing teenager after a car accident, while behind her, an elderly man waited hours to be seen. She had watched a mother collapse in grief after losing a baby, then had to walk into the next room smiling as if nothing had happened. The ethical dilemmas came daily. Did you spend the extra 10 minutes comforting the dying man without family, knowing it meant your other patients waited longer? Did you fudge the inventory numbers to make sure the short-staffed night crew had enough supplies? Did you challenge a doctor's decision when you knew it risked making enemies on the floor? And woven into it all was the quiet heartbreak of realizing that sometimes even your best wasn't enough. Rachel often thought of her friend Monica, a nurse she'd met during a relief trip to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Monica had told her once over coffee in the hospital cafeteria, "You can't save everybody, Ra, but you can look them in the eye. You can stand in that room with them and not run away." That idea stuck with Rachel during the chaos of CO-19, when she and her colleagues worked masked and exhausted through months of fear. She remembered standing at the bedside of a man gasping for breath, holding up an iPad so his family could say goodbye. She remembered slipping an encouraging note into a colleague's pocket before their shift. Rachel knew that nursing wasn't just about medicine. It was about witnessing, standing in the middle of someone's storm, offering whatever shelter you could. But as the hospital tightened its rules focused on protocols, efficiency, and legal protection, Rachel began to feel the tension grow. It was no longer just about healing. It was about not making a mistake that could cost the hospital money or reputation. More and more nurses were treated like liabilities, and that shift broke something inside her. Still, Rachel kept going because every once in a while there was a moment, a thank you note from a patient, a small recovery, a hand squeezed in gratitude that reminded her why she had chosen this life. What Rachel didn't know was that all those small acts, all those years of quiet defiance were preparing her for the day. The man in the battered military jacket walked through the hospital doors and forced her to choose once and for all between the rules and her own healing hands. It was just past noon when Samuel Sambrook stumbled through the sliding glass doors of St. Anne's Hospital. Rachel Carter was finishing up charting vitals on a pediatric patient when she heard the commotion at the front desk. Her pen hovered midair as her head turned instinctively toward the sound. Sam's entrance didn't cause a stir at first, just a quiet shift in atmosphere, like the air tightening before a storm. He was a tall man once, though the years had pulled his shoulders forward and hollowed his cheeks. His military jacket, faded olive green and fraying at the cuffs, hung loosely over a frame that had known better days. His face was slick with sweat, his gray hair matted, and a slow dark stain spread across his left sleeve. His eyes darted across the room wide and unfocused, as if the fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell had thrown him into another time. For a second, Rachel thought he might fall right there on the lobby floor. "Sir, I need you to stop right there." Nancy, the receptionist, raised a hand from behind the desk. She was good at her job, organized, no nonsense. But this wasn't part of her usual script. "Do you have insurance, sir?" "Identification." "We need to check you in." Sam patted at his pockets clumsily, the fingers on his good hand shaking. A battered wallet fell to the floor. No insurance card appeared, no driver's license, only a tattered photo face down on the tile. Rachel felt the familiar pull in her chest. The tension between her heart and her training protocol said, "You waited." The ER didn't process patients without registration, without insurance status, without the basics. You didn't just bring someone back. Not anymore. Not unless you wanted a note in your file or worse. But looking at Sam, Rachel saw something other than paperwork. She saw the trembling in his fingers, the way his breath came too fast, the yellowish pore of his skin. She saw the scar near his temple, the limp in his left leg, and she saw her father for a split second all over again. Not in the uniform, but in the weariness, the quiet desperation that people missed if they didn't care enough to look closer. "Nancy," Rachel called, walking forward before she could stop herself, get a wheelchair, and page Dr. Morrison. "Now, Rachel, he hasn't been processed," Nancy hissed, eyes wide. "He's crashing," Rachel said calmly. Already at Sam's side, one hand on his elbow, the other easing him into the nearest chair. "We don't need paperwork. We need an IV and antibiotics before that infection takes him out." Behind her, she could hear Linda at the nurse's station. "You're going to get written up again, Rachel." Rachel ignored it. She was focused on the clamminess of Sam's skin, the sluggish response when she tried to get his name. "Sam," he murmured. Just Sam. She knew that name wouldn't get him through the front desk or into a system, but it was enough for her. The tension between bureaucracy and compassion crackled in the air like a live wire. Rachel could feel it in every sideways glance, every clipped whisper. Hospitals were businesses now, their margins slim, their risks high. There were procedures, protections, liability concerns, all good intentions buried under a mountain of red tape. But Rachel remembered what her mentor Monica once told her. If you wait for the system, you'll miss the chance to save a life. So she moved not as an employee, but as a nurse, as a healer, and with each step lifting Sam into the bed, wrapping the cuff around his arm, starting a line. Rachel crossed an invisible line, one that would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. Rachel's hands moved on autopilot, cleaning the wound, checking vitals, preparing the IV, but inside her mind was racing. What am I doing? She could almost hear Eleanor Green's voice in her head, the sharp-edged warning from the last staff meeting. No treatments without physician authorization. One more incident, Rachel and we will have no choice but to take disciplinary action. This wasn't the first time Rachel had walked this line. There was the night she slipped a blanket to a homeless patient waiting for a psych evaluation, though policy said to avoid unnecessary contact. The time she stayed 4 hours past her shift to sit with a teenage overdose patient when the family never showed. The time during COVID, she smuggled an iPad into an isolation room so a dying man could see his wife's face one last time. Every time the same lecture, follow protocol. Stick to your scope. Protect the hospital. Rachel had nodded, promised to be more mindful, and returned to work with the same quiet conviction that had always guided her. You help people because it's right, not because it's convenient. But standing over Sam Brooks now, the weight of those warnings pressed heavy on her shoulders. She thought of her father again, the man whose failing lungs had drawn her to nursing in the first place. In his last days, the hospice nurse had bent the rules, slipping in extra time, extra comfort, extra care that no insurance policy accounted for. Rachel had never forgotten that. That's what healing means, her father had told her. Not just medicine. Mercy. Still doubt crept in. What if Sam had a bad reaction? What if he collapsed and someone blamed her? What if helping cost her the career she'd spent her whole adult life building? Why isn't anyone else stepping in? She wondered bitterly, glancing at the nurse's station where Linda peeked nervously over her computer screen, or at Nancy, still frozen behind the reception desk. It was the bystander effect. Rachel knew the term well. When responsibility is shared among many, no one feels compelled to act. People hesitate, unsure if they have the right, the authority, the protection to help. And so they wait watching while someone else suffers. Rachel understood why. The fear of punishment, of failure, of overstepping it, was built into the culture. Especially in medicine, mistakes had consequences. Risk wasn't encouraged, it was avoided. But moral courage, she'd learned, wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing the right thing in spite of it. So Rachel drew a breath and pushed the doubt down, listening instead to the rhythm of Sam's breathing, the feel of his pulse under her fingertips. His skin was hot, his blood pressure dropping. The signs were clear. This wasn't about defiance. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about one human being seeing another in distress and refusing to look away. Rachel caught Linda's eye across the room, and for a moment she saw something flicker there. Not disapproval, but longing. The longing to act, to be bold, to reach out without the chains of protocol. As she finished securing the IV line, Rachel felt her heart steady. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't rebellious. She was a nurse. And sometimes being a nurse meant remembering why you put on the scrubs in the first place, to stand in the gap when no one else would. By the next morning, Rachel Carter's world had unraveled. She stood at her apartment window, the early light filtering through thin curtains, phone in hand, watching the chaos unfold online. A 30-second clip, grainy, shaky, filmed by someone at the nurse's station, had gone viral overnight. The caption read, "Reckless nurse ignores hospital protocol, plays doctor." The video showed Rachel leaning over Sam Brooks, adjusting the IV, applying pressure to his arm. It didn't show his labored breathing, his shaking hands, or the cold sweat soaking through his jacket. It didn't show the empty nurse's station or the hesitation on everyone else's faces. It didn't capture the quiet desperation that Rachel had felt in that moment, the urgent pull to act. The comments were brutal. She should be fired. Who does she think she is? This is why hospitals have rules. Nurses like her are dangerous. By noon, Rachel had been officially suspended. No patient contact, no pay, no access to the hospital system. Security escorted her to her car, her badge confiscated at the door. As she walked through the parking lot with a small cardboard box of personal items, colleagues she had worked alongside for years avoided her gaze. Only a young nurse named Jenna gave her a tight, tear-airy hug. When Rachel got home, her mother called, voice trembling. "Rachel, what happened? Honey, you can't keep doing this to yourself. You can't save the world." Rachel listened in silence, exhaustion pressing down like a weight. The media storm was just beginning. Talk shows debated her case. Was she a hero or a reckless rule breaker? Hospital administrators issued carefully worded statements about investigations and policy reviews. Reporters camped outside her apartment building, their vans parked like vultures on the curb. But beneath the noise, other voices began to emerge. There was Frank Morales, a Vietnam veteran who had been Rachel's patient after hip surgery. He posted a video on social media, his growly voice firm. "She sat by my bed when nobody else had time. She treated me like a man, not a chart. You don't throw away nurses like that." Then came Susan Clark, a cancer survivor, who remembered Rachel staying late to hold her hand through chemo. "She was the only one who didn't flinch when I lost my hair. She called me beautiful when I couldn't stand the mirror." That's who she is, a local Army reservist Marcus Hale tweeted. "She saved a fellow veteran. I'd want her in my corner any day." For every angry comment, a ripple of support pushed back. Patients, veterans, families, people who had known Rachel's quiet care firsthand began to speak. But still, the public trial raged on. Rachel sat at her kitchen table watching the storm, realizing how fast the world had changed. Social media didn't wait for truth, didn't pause for context. It judged in headlines and hashtags and viral clips, stripped of nuance. She thought about the price of compassion in a world obsessed with liability, about how quick people were to tear down what they didn't understand about the human cost of a culture where one moment, one decision could erase years of work. Yet, amid the noise, Rachel felt a flicker of something steadier than anger or fear. She wasn't alone. And though her job was gone for now, her purpose had not disappeared. The small tarnished badge sat on Rachel's kitchen table, its dull silver edges catching the morning light. Rachel turned it over in her hand for the 100th time, fingers brushing across the faint engraving on the back. Whole class 1968. No military branch, no unit number, just a name and a date. Her heart thudded as she typed the words into her laptop, hoping for a trace. Anything to explain why Sam Brooks, the frail veteran she'd treated, had pressed it into her palm just before security arrived. The screen loaded slowly, then froze. Rachel frowned, tapping the trackpad. The spinning wheel mocked her, and then with a sudden flicker, the screen went black. A chill prickled down her spine. She reached for her phone, intending to search there instead, when it vibrated in her hand. A text popped up from an unknown number. "Do you know who you saved today?" Rachel's breath caught. Her eyes darted to the window. Across the street, under the faint orange glow of a street lamp, sat a black SUV engine, idling headlights off. She hadn't seen it there when she got home. Her pulse quickened. She moved to the window, heart pounding, phone gripped tightly in her hand. The SUV remained still, as if watching Rachel's mind raced. What had she stumbled into? Sam, if that was even his real name, had seemed like any other neglected veteran when he staggered into the ER. But the badge, the military scars, the strange reaction when a news report about Afghanistan had flashed on the waiting room TV. It all clicked now in a way she hadn't wanted to admit. He was no ordinary patient. Frustration bubbled up inside her, mixing with fear and a sharp stab of anger. Why had no one told her? Why had Sam left her holding the pieces of this puzzle only to disappear behind a curtain of secrecy? Rachel slammed her laptop shut and paced the kitchen, thoughts spiraling. She had risked her job, her reputation, her future to help a stranger. And now she realized she had been pulled into something much larger. She gritted her teeth. She didn't like being used. For a moment, the old doubts returned. Maybe the hospital had been right. Maybe she should have followed the rules. Maybe none of this would have happened if she had just waited like everyone else. But no, deep down, Rachel knew that wasn't true. Her hands had moved on instinct, her heart on conviction. She had seen a man in need, not a headline, not a threat, not a case file. And if she had hesitated, he might have died on that hospital bed. Still, she couldn't deny the cold knot of fear forming in her stomach. Whoever was watching from that SUV, they knew who she was. They knew where she lived. Rachel sat down slowly, the badge still cradled in her palm. She realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The knock at the door came just before midnight. The hospital lobby was a scene Rachel Carter never thought she'd witness in her lifetime. 6 black SUVs lined the circular drive, their polished exteriors gleaming under the late afternoon sun. One by one, the door swung open, and men and women in full Marine dress uniforms emerged, rows of gleaming medals across their chest. White gloves, polished shoes striking the pavement in perfect cadence. At their front was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reed. His posture was ramrod straight, his face carved in the stone-hard calm of a man used to command. As they approached the sliding doors, the hospital fell into an unnatural silence. Phones emerged from pockets. Patients, nurses, doctors, and visitors lined the walls and balconies, whispering, watching, recording inside Eleanor Green. The hospital administrator adjusted her blazer with trembling fingers as she marched toward the entrance. She was flanked by 2 board members in the hospital's legal council. When the automatic doors parted, Reed stepped through, offering no greeting, no hesitation. He went straight to Eleanor and stopped just short of arm's reach. "Miss Green," his voice was smooth but ironclad. "I need to speak with you regarding Nurse Rachel Carter." Eleanor forced a thin smile. "Lieutenant Colonel Reed, this is a private matter. You'll need to make an appointment." Reed raised an eyebrow, pulled a slim leather folder from under his arm, and flipped it open with military precision. Inside were documents stamped with government seals and a formal photograph, Sam Brooks, younger, sharper, and unmistakably the same man Rachel had treated. "That private matter," Reed said, voice cutting through the room, "involves Colonel Samuel Brooks, who, despite your hospital's refusal of care, survived because of one woman's actions." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's eyes darted nervously toward the cameras now recording the staff frozen in place, the patients holding their breath. "We had no way of knowing," Eleanor murmured, voice faltering. "You had one way." Reed shot back his gaze, unwavering. "Her," he gestured toward the doors behind him. Rachel stepped forward, then flanked by 2 Marines, her face pale but resolute. Her colleagues parted, stunned into silence. Linda, who had once whispered warnings, lowered her head. Jenna, the young nurse, smiled tearfully. Reed's voice softened slightly. This nurse saved a man who has spent decades in service to this nation, gathering intelligence, protecting lives. Had she obeyed your rules, we would be burying him today, along with years of classified operations. Ella Laner's hands trembled as she reached for the folder. We didn't know, no, Reed replied quietly, but she didn't need to. Rachel met Eleanor's gaze, her heart pounding, but her chin lifted. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight on her shoulders lift, not because the cameras were rolling, but because in the quiet, the truth had finally been spoken. The Marines stepped back. The crowd parted, and Rachel walked through the hospital she had once called home. No longer the nurse under suspension, but the nurse who chose humanity over protocol. The following Monday, Rachel Carter stood once again in the hospital lobby, this time without security guards at her side. Eleanor Green faced her at the front desk. The hospital board lined up behind her like a jury no longer in session. Eleanor cleared her throat, holding out a crisp letter with the hospital's letterhead, Nurse Carter. She said, her voice tight but measured on behalf of St. Anne's Hospital. We would like to offer our formal apology. Your suspension has been lifted with full reinstatement, back pay, and our deepest gratitude. Rachel accepted the letter, her hands steady, her eyes searching Eleanor's face. There was a flicker of something there. Not just formality, but humility, maybe even respect. The impact rippled quickly across the hospital in the break room, where Rachel once overheard whispers about her troublemaking. Nurses now leaned in to listen to her advice. Jenna, the young nurse, began keeping a small notebook of patient details just like Rachel's. Linda, once wary of breaking rules, quietly followed Rachel's lead in small moments, lingering at a patient's bedside. A little longer, speaking up when a family needed an advocate. The hospital administration moved fast too. Meetings were held, policies were rewritten, emergency exceptions were clarified. Even Eleanor Green admitted in a rare staff meeting that protocols exist to protect, but they should never replace compassion. Rachel didn't ask to be called a hero. She simply went back to work charting vitals, holding hands, remembering birthdays. But something inside her had shifted. Where before she sometimes wondered if her small acts mattered, now she knew without a doubt they did. As for Sam Brooks, Colonel Samuel Brooks, he didn't disappear. Every month or so, Rachel would find a letter in her mailbox. Sometimes it was a simple thank you, sometimes a story from his past. Once a folded photo of his grandchildren, whom he was finally able to visit without the cloud of his secret assignments hanging over him. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, a knock came at Rachel's apartment door. She opened it to find Sam standing there, leaning slightly on a cane, a soft smile on his weathered face. They sat on her small porch for hours, sipping tea and talking, not about war or duty, but about ordinary things, gardens, books, the stubborn loyalty of cats. In the months that followed, Rachel found herself reflecting often on how one small choice, one refusal to look away, had set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. A system had been shaken, a hospital had been changed, a life had been saved. She knew now more than ever that kindness was not a soft, passive thing. It was brave. It was disruptive. It was the quiet force that could bend even the hardest institutions towards something better. And sometimes it only took a nurse with healing hands to remind the world what healing really meant. In the end, Rachel Carter's story is not just about one nurse or one veteran. It's about a truth we too often forget, that the rules we create, whether in hospitals, schools, governments, or even families, are meant to serve people, not control them. Protocols have their place. They keep us safe, organized, and efficient. But when rules become walls that shut out compassion, when they turn into excuses for inaction, we risk losing the very heart of what makes us human. Rachel's choice to help Sam Brooks was not just a moment of defiance. It was a reminder that at our best, we are built to care for one another. She showed us that kindness is not weakness. It's a quiet form of courage. It's the thing that changes outcomes, shifts systems, and sometimes saves lives. In today's world where headlines change by the minute and social media rushes to judgment, Rachel Carter's story reminds us of something timeless: the power of simple human kindness. Rules matter. They keep order. They guide systems, but they should never replace our ability to see the person standing right in front of us. Rachel's choice to help Sam Brooks wasn't just about saving a life. It was about showing that even in the most structured, pressured environments, compassion still has a place. That lesson matters in hospitals, yes, but it also matters in families, neighborhoods, and communities. For many older Americans watching this, you know that life's most important moments often have nothing to do with rules or reputation. They come down to how we treat one another when no one's watching. Maybe you were the neighbor who checked on someone after a storm, or maybe a stranger once helped you carry groceries when your hands were full. I'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments. What's one act of kindness you've given or received that stayed with you all these years? How did it shape the way you see the world? Thank you for spending your time with this story today. Your time is valuable, and I'm honored you chose to share it here. If this touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of the best in each other. Because in the end, it's not the big things that define us. It's the quiet moments of goodness that ripple across a lifetime. Let's keep that conversation going.